I want to start off with a story this morning. I'm calling today's message Right, Wrong, and the Book of Opinion. And if you have your Bibles today and want to go there, we will be in Romans chapter 14, 1 through 12. That will be our main passage. Also, if you're a guest today, we always provide notes, and the notes have all of the passages. Sometimes there's a verse or two that's not on there, but that way you can keep up. And I teach from the New Living Translation if you want to go to your iPhone app or whatever for that. So, but I just want to start off with a story. I recommitted my life to the Lord at 26 years old, and up to that point, it was such a challenge to me all the time going to church. I went because I felt like I had to, and I went because I met Lisa and I wanted to be with the blonde. I went with all the wrong reasons to go to church, and then when I was 26 years old, one night, sitting in a Sunday evening service at First Baptist Church, Euless, God just changed my heart, where I realized it was about the love of God and the relationship of God through Jesus Christ, and it wasn't about the how many times I went to church and all that. And all of a sudden, it just excited me now to be a Christian. I couldn't wait to go to church. I couldn't wait to be involved. I couldn't wait to serve. I started giving a little while after that. All of those things, life changed the way I started crying. I never cried before that. But just so many things in my life changed at that time. And I went and I became a counselor after that. And then I became an associate pastor and went to work at a large church in the area. And I'll just tell you, when I went to work at that church as the second guy, the associate pastor, the church was really struggling. The pastor had recently lost all of his staff. There had been infighting and things going on, and they bailed. And it had been my home church, and I loved that church. And the pastor flew to where I was working at the time and talked to me and invited me to come back and join their staff. And part of my job, I think part of the reason why they recruited me and not just somebody from the outside was that was my church home, and they thought that me being part of the inside could help heal some of the hurts and pull things together. And I started working there, and I'll just tell you, it was hard. Walking into that disunity, and it was just very difficult. Now, like I said, I love church. I just couldn't wait to be there. That's a part of who I've been up to that point from the time I was 26 years old. And there were we kind of had a leadership vacuum. The pastor was tired and close to resigning, and I did my best to lead from the side chair, and it just didn't work. And I was trying to pull everybody together, and we had the charismatic group that wanted us to do more charismatic things, and we had the traditional group that wanted us to become the more traditional Southern Baptist church. We had the group that was ticked off because in the new building we didn't put an organ. We had you just wouldn't believe the arguments and the discussions and I'm sitting there trying to hold it all together, and all of a sudden one day, it wasn't going to be so fun to get up and go to church the next morning. And for the first time in a long time, I was dreading getting up and going to church the next morning. So it was Saturday night. Of course, I had the key to the church, so I go to the church and go into the worship center, and I went to the front, and it was a lot bigger building than this. I think we sat about 1,200 seats in there, and I turned just enough light on that I could see the platform, and I went and kneeled at the platform, and I begged for my joy back. Begged. I couldn't understand, I couldn't understand anymore. I couldn't understand. It just happened. It changed overnight. It's like I couldn't put up with the crud anymore, and it just all of a sudden it was there, and I kneeled down and I cried out to God. It was about midnight, and I'm all by myself in this big building, and I never heard an audible voice, but in my heart, I heard God say, your joy is because I'm there. And he said, I don't care what's going on with everybody else. He said, I am there. And my joy came back. And I came back the next morning, and the church, the atmosphere hadn't changed a bit. It wasn't too long after that the pastor resigned, and we started through that whole process. But the joy came back when I realized it was about the love again. It wasn't all about the people. It was about the love, and that changed. And I went back the next morning, and there were still the gripey people and still the unhappy people, but I was on cloud 9 again, loving and doing what I want to do. And I want to tell you something. What I'm talking about today in Romans chapter 14 is the first thing that I've got on your notes there. And disunity has always been a problem for God's people. Always. I mean, just think about it. If you're the devil, what's the best way to go after God's people? You get them fighting among themselves about the silliest, dumbest, stupidest things you could possibly imagine. But to the person who believes that that's important, their conviction, their opinion, that's important to them. It's the kind of thing that will make them unhappy and make them cause problems. If in the Old Testament, the families were always at war with each other. There were civil war among the Israelites all the time. In all of Paul's letters, he's writing these letters to different churches. You know, the epistles, Philippians, Corinthians, Galatians, those are all, and he's writing these letters to churches, and he's going, you know, we got to fix this. It's a unity thing. We've got to fix it. In Galatians, he wrote to that church, and he said, if you guys are always biting and devouring one another, some of y'all have been to churches like that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He said, beware of destroying one another. Now, he didn't mean one of you is going to walk in with a knife one day and take everybody out. You were destroying yourself spiritually with disunity and destroying the unity that goes with being a part of the church. Psalm 133:1. Psalm 133 is a 3-verse psalm that talks about one thing: the importance of harmony, the importance of unity. And there's a song we've sung here often that came out probably 20 years ago, and it's from this one verse in Psalm 133:1. Look what it says. Just say it with me. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. Now think about it. Your best times in church are when you come in and you kind of forget about everything except worshiping God and doing things together, isn't it? You think back, I mean, that's why it was killing me so bad, and that's what was taking my joy away, was that kind of unity thing wasn't going on. But it's important to realize how that harmony, I mean, just think about it. Football fans, got any football fans in here? Sporting goods fan, team. You like team sports? I've been a chaplain for a high school football team for years. I've been involved in teams after team after team, and there's something that stands out incredibly. It doesn't matter what kind of talent you have on your team. If you don't have unity, the team is dead. Unity is the key. I've watched teams that had so much talent that people just would froth at the mouth as a coach to get a chance, just drool to get a chance to coach that team. But the disunity made them a terrible, terrible team. And I've been on teams that I'm involved with that didn't have any, there wasn't a superstar one, but they were all leaders and they were all captains and they were all a team and they were all in it together. And those were the teams that would go out and people would go, well, they don't measure up, there's no way. And they would whoop the people, and they would play till the last second. Unity. If you want to destroy a team, if you want to destroy a church, you take away the unity. You mess up the camaraderie, the teamwork. Next thing on your notes. Christians have right, they have wrong, and they have an opinion or a conviction. Now, I want to make sure you get this straight as we're going through here, because I'm going to be talking about opinion. There is a right and a wrong. And it's not gray. It's clear. And the closer you get to God, the more you see the right and wrong. But in churches, in God's family, there are a lot of things that have to do with opinion or their own convictions that will make people disagree and be in disagreement. And that's what Paul is doing here in this letter. He's writing to the church in Rome. It's in the middle of arguing about the things that are not really necessary. They're not really important. Some of them are concerned that you got to remember, this is a group of people that have come from Jewish people who have been very legalistic and they've spent. Remember, Jesus just chewed them out for being so religious. Dude, you're just making up more rules than there are. I mean, they were very legalistic. And then there was a group of Gentiles who worshiped all different other kind of gods and all this. And these two groups of people come together. So you can imagine the arguments and the fighting and the things that went on. Now, conviction is important. And personal convictions are important. But if you look back on some of the things that you grew up with that had no basis really biblically, so they could be called right or wrong, they were gray. Christians argue about the use of tobacco. Christians argue about dancing. Now, a couple of years ago, well, it's been more than a couple of years ago now, I was a chaperone at one of Nick's dance at Great Mountain High School. And I walked in, and I walked up to a kid and said, if you do that to a girl one more time, I'm throwing you out here. So there are bad things in dancing that you can do, you know. Tattoos, facial hair. How do you dress at church? Do you dress up or do you not dress up? Do you take a bath or do you not take a bath? There's, you know, the types of songs that you sing. Sunday school or not Sunday school, using credit cards, reading secular books and magazines, or listening to secular music, homeschool or public school. These are things that you go to different churches throughout the country, and there's somebody who has a platform, or there's one group of one of those that has that decision made that's who they are, and they're not accepting of anybody else who doesn't come and believe and act the way they want to. I had one lady one time who had been a part of LCC for a while and loved it, and all of a sudden she didn't like it anymore. And I followed her up. She hadn't been to church in weeks, and I called her and she said, Royal, I just decided you don't teach the Bible enough, so we've gone to another church that teaches the Bible more. Well, irony of it is the exact same week that she left our church, we had a lady come to our church that was from the church that this lady went to. And I, lots of times when somebody leaves another church, I'll say, well, how come you're not at that church anymore? Because I'm just telling you, you can inherit some problems. You don't always get real excited when somebody leaves one church and comes to your church. And she said, well, he just doesn't teach the Bible enough, you know. So a lot of that opinion and conviction, a lot of that comes from just the feelings people have and the things that are going on in their life. They may not even be true to what the real facts are. This quote, I always, when I use a quote, I want to make sure I find out who said something. This next quote that's in your St. Augustine and St. Francis of Assisi were both given credit for this, but everything else I've read says it was a guy in the 1500s who was a theologian named Peter Miderian, if I said that right, Midderlin. He says of the church and things, right and wrong things. He says, in things that are necessary, we have what? Unity. That's important. It's important we have unity and that Jesus Christ is our Savior. And there's a lot of things that it's in rights and wrongs. Those are the necessary things. It's important that we have unity. We can worship any way we want to. We can be Methodist. We can be Baptist. We can be Catholic. We can be whatever. But but we're to have unity in the things that are necessary. And then he says, in things that are not necessary, we give liberty. We're not going to be all over you because you're not wearing a tie to church. We're not going to be all over you because you believe that drinking's okay and I believe that drinking's not okay. You give liberty in the things that are gray, the things that aren't spelled out, the things that you can't point back to being immorally wrong. Again, you go back. There is right and wrong. And here's something you have to understand. Ready? A lot of people don't like this. It is our job to call out brothers and sisters in Christ who are right, don't do right in the right wrong. You know what I'm saying? But in things that are not necessary, you give liberty. And then in all things, you give grace. It's important for us to realize that there are people who are stronger in their faith and weaker in their faith, and grace is so important. I've had so many people, and one of the reasons why we call Life Connection Church Life Connection Churches, I've had so many people that I dealt with in counseling that constantly felt like they were being judged and looked down on in their churches because they weren't being the person that they were supposed to be at that time in their life. So let's look at these verses. Look at, this is Romans 14, verse 1. He writes, accept other believers who are weak in faith and don't argue with them about what they think is right and wrong. Now, I think it's important that you realize and circle think. Remember, the Bible says there are ways that seem right to man that lead to death. So there's right ways and there are wrong ways. He says, accept believers who are weak in their faith and don't argue with them about what they think is right and wrong. Facial hair, tattoos, whatever the thing is, dressing up for church. The word accept here means to receive or welcome. One thing that I hear from people all the time about LCC is I've never been to a church before that I felt so welcome. I hear that all the time. Every once in a while, I have a person, because of something that's going on in their life, complain about our lack of friendliness, but I know that's not a true statement. LCC people are loving and caring people, and people are accepted when they come here. Now, I will tell you this, from the day you come to LCC, it's not my goal as your pastor for you to stay where you're at. It's my goal for you to grow in character, to become more like Jesus, to be God's love with skin better. Those are all the things as a pastor that it's my goal to see you change. The things that are harmful to you that you do, the weaknesses that you have. I want to help you with those and see you have strengths in those areas. That's, as a pastor, as a shepherd, that's what my goal is. Every believer is weak in some area. And we have to realize that. We have to realize the things that we struggle with, that we're weak at. And we have liberty. Remember, in the unnecessary things, we have liberty and we have God's grace. But there are things, the Apostle Paul says, that we choose to do for the right reason, whether it's something that's legal or moral or whatever. Does that make sense? Alcohol is a perfect example of that. Alcohol is a perfect example of that. I've told y'all before, I chose at 26 not to drink alcohol. The Bible doesn't teach not to drink alcohol. The Bible does teach not to get drunk. You know, I talk to people and they go, well, I don't get drunk. I can drink 6 beers. Well, you had to build your way up to that. You had to sin like a whole bunch of times to get to where you weren't sinning anymore. You know what I'm saying? But the reason as you mature that you'll decide to do the things you do or not do is because you'll think of the impact that it has on other people. The last time I took a drink of alcohol, I had just started teaching a 12th grade Sunday school class. And Lisa and I were sitting in Tupanamas, our favorite Mexican food place at the time over in Dallas and on Northwest Highway. And I was drinking I think I was drinking a frozen margarita. And as I'm sitting there with my Mexican food and my frozen margarita, a teenage boy about the age of the kids that I teach walked over and stood by my table. And my first thought was, what kind of an impact would I have on a weaker Christian or someone who... And I pushed it aside, and that was the last time. Now, I watch pastors on Facebook and blog sites argue and brag about buying the most expensive beer and all this stuff. And I'm thinking, what impact does that have on other people? And that's what we do with the choices that we have. It can be right, it can be okay, but is it okay in this situation? Is it okay with your children? Are the things that you do, even though they may be considered ethical, they may even be considered moral or legal, are they the right things to do? What kind of an impact is somebody going to be watching you? Is it going to have on their lives? So us, as we give people liberty for the things that are unnecessary, like arguing over whether it's alcohol or not, but we have to ask ourselves, is it the right thing for me to do? I am a soda aficionado. And I just think, why would you choose that over grape? Or cream soda? Or ginger ale? There's only one reason. They don't give you a buzz. I talk to people that drink all the time that don't like the taste, and they'll admit they drink it because it takes care of their problems in their head. That is the wrong reason to do it. And there's a lot of different situations. You have to ask yourself, can I do this without tempting myself to sin? Can I do this without tempting other people that are around me to sin? The church I used to serve at we had reached a lot of Catholics in that area. It was Maryland. Maryland was founded by Catholics, so Catholics all over the place. And I was head over our small groups, and I was counseling with a guy who was a recovering alcoholic and hadn't been sober for very long, and I sent him to a small group, and I asked him later on, how'd the small group go? He goes, well, it just felt a little awkward when everybody drank wine because I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do, and we had to write a church policy that you don't have alcohol at church events, you know. Doesn't mean that it was wrong, but it was having a negative, terrible impact on this other person. And you can look at life instances one after another and look at that. That's just one of the easiest ones for me to explain. Verse 2. Now, the church here was arguing about a couple things. One is they were arguing about whether to eat food that had been sacrificed for idols or certain types of drinks. They were arguing about what days to have church. If you were a Jewish person, what day did they have church? What day was the Sabbath? Okay. When you were part of the new way, what day did they have church? Can you imagine the arguments that went on? There's still people that argue about whether you have church on Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, what day's your Sabbath or whatever. Those things are, but all this other kind of stuff is going on. And look at verse 2. For instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything, but another unbeliever with a sensitive conscience will eat only vegetables. Those who feel free to eat anything must not look down on those who don't, and those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do. For, say it with me, God has accepted them. If you have certain things that you feel that you want to do, that God has convicted you of, that it honors God, as long as you don't make it the legalistic rule. You know, I was talking to somebody the other day about having a prayer closet. And there are people that, and the guy said, well, we don't have to have a prayer closet. That's true. But for some people, a prayer closet is a very good thing for them to have. They can go there and they know that they check out of everything else and they check into their prayer closet, and that's prayer time. We all have different ways of doing things, and God, that's the first thing on your number one is God has accepted them. Now, the interesting thing is, in this passage, Paul is calling the religious people weak. He's not calling the ones that are out there doing things that they haven't been doing religiously. He's calling the people weak that are chewing people out and looking down on them for not. Remember the arguments they had about circumcision and all that other kind of stuff? Paul's going, look, he's calling these people weak people because they're depending more on their religion and how they feel about their religion. And in the Gentiles, it was way easier for the Gentiles to give everybody liberty because they've been doing everything all their life anyway. But God has accepted them, and we should accept them. Paul says, don't condemn those because God has accepted them. Look at verse 4. Who are you to condemn someone else's servants? Now, this is a letter to Christians. So who's he talking about? Whose servant are these people? God's, right? He's not talking about a person or a slave owner or anything else like this. He's talking about, who are you to condemn someone else's servants? Their own master. Now this is important because we think so much sometimes about God's grace and having our fire insurance that we just go about doing our life however we want to. You got to remember, your own master is going to judge you. And your own master is going to judge whether you stand or you fall. And with the Lord's help, see, God, Jesus wants to help you be the best that you can possibly be. That's what He wants. And He's the one that, you know, let me just tell you something. If you're feeling convicted to do something or not do something, well, if you're feeling convicted to do something and it doesn't measure up scripturally, but if, let's just say you're feeling convicted that maybe you shouldn't do this, don't go by whether it's right or wrong. Go by what God's convicted you of. And then don't judge other people for not going by what God has convicted you of. It's important for us to realize that those God helps us and changes our minds about the things we do because of the people that we're interacted with and what goes on with our life and what kind of weaknesses that we have and all of those things. Their own master will judge them and help them stand or fall. With the Lord's help, they will stand and receive His approval. Number 2, God is the judge, and we should focus on serving Him. That should be our number 1 thing. Let's go back to the unity in the church. If your only and my only desire is to serve God, that's going to be the thing that helps us be in unity. Because we're going to be, I know, and nobody really, LCCers are real good about, nobody's really come and griped to me. I know there's got to be somebody in here that's not excited that we're trying to raise funds and build a building and all that. That just happens, you know. People do that. But most people, when they're all working and serving along with God, we're in this together. And we're going to make this thing happen. And that's why it's so cool when we baptize somebody or a new person joins our church or all of a sudden you see a full stage full of people that are leading us in worship and you see all the good, cool things that happen. That's why every single one of us, just like any other team, can go, we're a part of this. And that's why also when things go bad or when somebody's hurting or when somebody's sick or when somebody's jumped way off track or somebody's gotten away from God or any of the bad things happen, we can go, you know, as a church, how do we make this better? It's the family thing. It's we should focus on serving and worshiping God. If you remember, that's where our unity comes from. That's how good and pleasant it is to be in that situation, as the psalmist wrote. Remember, Paul's not talking here about the real right and wrong. He's talking about the opinions or the convictions that each of us have. Verse 5, in the same way, some think one day is more holy than another day, while others think every day is alike. You should each be fully convinced of whichever day you choose as acceptable. Verse 6, those who worship the Lord on a special day, why do you do it? To honor Him. Those who eat any kind of food, do so to honor the Lord. There's a pattern here. You seen it? Since they give thanks to God before eating. And those who refuse to eat certain foods also want to please the Lord and give thanks to God. That's our goal in everything we do. We have to ask ourselves all the time, am I being the person who's pleasing God? Verse 7, for we don't live for ourselves or die for ourselves. If we live, it's to, say it with me, honor the Lord. And if we die, say it with me, It's to honor the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to the Lord. Christ died and rose again for this very purpose, to be Lord both of the living and of the dead. Number 3, Jesus Christ is Lord. That is the key. That is the key. I was teaching our youth on Wednesday night, and the average teenager has no clue what Lord means. Just no clue. And I hear people, when they try to explain what Lord is, will say things like, well, He's my boss, He's this, He's that. And I want to tell you something. Boss doesn't cut it. How many of you here have had a boss that you didn't like? You know what I'm saying? But Lord, and this is the best way, and this may sound just insignificant to you, but the best way for me to explain Lord and how my life changed that night is that Lord is an all-encompassing, you're a part. It's funny because I texted Lisa yesterday and I said, I just thought about this. I texted Lisa yesterday and I said, love you, and went back to work, and she texts back, love you too, ha ha ha. I know, just wait, I'm getting there. And I said, ha ha ha, she making fun of me because I said I love you? And then I looked and she had wrote what I wrote. I wrote, I live you. So she texts back, I live you, ha ha ha. But you know what? That's a definition of Lord. Isn't it? There's never, ever, ever anything I do, think, anything. I've been married to Lisa for almost 35 years now. There's absolutely nothing I ever do that I don't think about how it's going to affect her, how she's going to feel about it. Am I embarrassing to her? Am I what? That's Lord. I live you. So when you pray now, I've given you something you can text God. You can say, I live you. And when it tries to change it to love, you go, no, I live you. Jesus Christ is Lord. He decides what's right and wrong. We will be unified if we worship God. We will be unified if we worship God, if it's all about God. Look at verse 10. So why do you condemn another believer? Why do you look down on another believer? Remember, we will stand before the judgment seat of God. Now, when they read that, and if you're a Christian who hasn't studied the Bible very much, you're going to think, I'm not worried about standing before the judgment seat of God because I have my fire insurance. I've committed my life to Jesus Christ. I said I've made Him Lord. I walked the aisle. I got baptized. I joined the church. I did whatever. Remember, this is a letter to Christians. You're going, Christians are going to stand before the judgment seat? Yes. We're going to be graded. And the word that's used here for judgment seat is a word that's the same word for an athletic event where judges are standing there and grading how the athlete did, whether it's gymnastics or you know what I'm saying? We're going to be judged for the stuff we do. That's going to determine our reward. Did y'all know that? I mean, heaven's going to be way better than it is here, but we're going to be rewarded for the things that we do here. So we will stand before the judgment seat of God. The Scriptures say, as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bend to me and every tongue will declare allegiance to God. Yes, each of us will give a personal account to God. That's an uh-oh verse. If you're not living your life on track for God right now and you're a Christian, that is an uh-oh verse. We will account for our actions and our service and the condition of our heart. So here's a couple of questions for you in your prayer time here, in your time with God. Is Jesus Lord of my life? And am I living Him? Am I living Him? Am I influencing people to love Jesus? Remember, you're either influencing Him from or you're influencing Him to. If you're in the middle, you're influencing them from. Am I serving in the body of Christ?